You don't see Spitfire displays quite like this anymore. The Shuttleworth Collection's clipped wing Mark V in the hands of Andy Sephton, who talks through this routine recorded during the 1990s at the Shuttleworth Collection's airfield at Old Warden.
So racing down runway 04 at Old Warden, tail comes up very quickly. We only use this runway when there's lots of wind on the nose. So she gets airborne in about 2/3 of the distance. So we're off in about 400 metres, which is not bad for a fighter, is it? As soon as we're airborne, get the gear up. The gear sits in front of the radiator. There's only one on this airplane, being a Mark V. If we leave the gear down, or if the gear sticks down, very rapidly the temperature's over the clock. After takeoff, controls are checked, both in pitch, roll and yaw, and then a roll just for exhilaration, just to make sure the aircraft can still turn upside down. Display in this airplane is characterised really by the airplane itself. The clip wings give it a fast roll rate, but they make it look a little bit ugly. So we tend to concentrate on the fast rolls, lots of those, and try not to show too much of the plan view, except on the top surface pass, which is a characteristic of the Shuttleworth Collection shows, because of the curved display line available. The display here starts with a Cuban 8, which is a run-in, high-speed, low-level, pulling up at about 260 miles an hour into a half loop, then rolling off to do the same in the other direction. Keeping the G positive, although the aircraft's upside down, a slight pull is kept on the airplane all the way through. If the G goes negative, the engine will stop. It's a carbureted engine as opposed to fuel-injected engine. Negative G is not a problem for the airplane. It's not a major problem for the engine. It'll soon start again afterwards, but it does tend to shock load it. The other reason for staying away from negative G is as it comes on, oil pressure falls to 0, which is also not very good for the airplane, so we try and minimise that as much as possible. The field of view from the airplane, although you can see directly out of the front, directly to the sides, it's difficult to see forward and down because of the engine. Also difficult to see to the sides and down because of the wings, so you tend to navigate by looking at the back and see where you've been rather than where you're going. So after the Cuban 8 at level 360, it does show the plan view of the airplane, but we need to do something other than half Cubans and fast passes all the time. After the level 360, a pull-up and the first of the rapid rolls there through about 420 degrees. Following that, there's a barrel roll, a graceful manoeuvre, much better to do on a round-winged aeroplane, but again thrown in here just to show something different. Coming down on the B-axis, again a characteristic of Old Warden is that there's two display lines at about 90 degrees to each other. Both have to be used because the spectators at both ends. It creates a little bit more thought for the pilot on a straight display, but it also means that you can show both aspects of the airplane, both the underside and the top side. Another thing we try and do on all of the displays is to do high passes and low passes so that both the people at the back are pleased and the people at the front are pleased as well. It doesn't always work. Following the barrel rolls is a series of semi-slow speed manoeuvres. Most of the energy of the aircraft is now being washed off with the tight turns, and there's not enough left in the airplane without pulling a wide circuit to speed up to do a safe roll off top. So there now comes a series of passes behind the tower and in front of the tower. You'll notice from the video that you're looking at that the cockpit appears quite large. It's a characteristic of wide-angle lenses, unfortunately. In fact, the cockpit is small by modern standards, and to some extent small by wartime standards too, although a lot of the aircraft tended to narrow quite significantly at the shoulders. Inside, in fact, the cockpit is quite cavernous. If you drop a map, you'll never get it back again. One of the two occasions that I've ever been lost in an airplane, one of them was in a Spitfire. on my way to Duxford from East Midlands, where I had my map on my knee. I rolled to look at another airplane going underneath, and when I got the airplane back on a level keel, the map had dropped to the floor and stayed there for the remainder of the flight, but that's another story. Regarding the handling of the airplane, one of the best kept secrets of the Spitfire is that it's one of the easiest of the tailwheel group of airplanes to fly. A very honest machine. The handling qualities are quite outstanding. The harmonisation of the controls. Pitch is very light throughout the whole envelope. That makes it pleasant to display because at low speed and high speed you don't have to trim. You can hold the forces quite easily. Can get a little bit heavier in roll at high speed, but that's no detriment to the airplane. But comparing it to other aircraft of the period, the handling qualities are quite outstanding. In the Spitfire, it's unique in that particular machine they got it right, and it's a very, very pleasant airplane to fly. You'll see me now glancing down at my watch. Normal display at Shuttleworth is 7 minutes. On the Spitfire, we normally plan it 7 minutes from takeoff to final manoeuvre. There's then a couple of minutes to cool the engine down. On a hot day, then you can be touching the upper limit of the radiator temperature during the display. If you don't cool it down for landing, then you'll overheat round finals or shortly after touching down. Yes, it's time to finish. Okay, if it wasn't, then I'd throw in another 360, but it is. So the aircraft is brought down as low as possible to fly along the long runway and complete the show with a classic victory roll. Nose is pulled up, aileron is set, not as much as for the fast roll. And then aileron changed as the roll is progressing to maintain the same roll rate. And a quick look at the horizon. The nose will drop as it gets inverted, but again, we let it fall through, keep the G positive all the way around. On the Old Warden airplane, at the end of the show, because the strip at Old Warden is quite short, we have to land at the minimum possible speed. So to achieve that, we stall the airplane, which is what you can see happening at the moment. The gear's gone down, the flap's gone down. At the point of stall, you'll see that everything in the cockpit starts to flash. The airplane shakes, the tab on the back of my head flies up, the straps will fly up. That marks the stall on the airspeed indicator, and it then defines the approach speed, or the speed that I can come over the boundary fence. There we go, the nose has just dropped. The flaps and probably the gear will now go up to ease the airflow. As soon as you drop the gear and the flaps in the Spitfire, it blanks off the radiator, which increases the temperature. So as soon as we've stalled it with the gear and flaps down, the gear and flaps go up, the circuit is completed, the last possible moment the gear will go down, and just before crossing the threshold almost, the flap will go down. The aircraft will be landed at about 5 knots above the stalling speed. You can see the runway right now, just to the left of the nose, coming up just above the wing. In fact, the cannon's pointing directly at it, and in that particular case we landed on the tail wheel, so we've raised the nose a little bit too high. To get the maximum deceleration on landing, we move off the runway onto the long grass and also use the hill. We don't need the brakes on landing. They're not very effective, and if you use them, you probably nose over anyway. So we just allow the long grass, the drag, and the run up the hill to slow the airplane. As soon as you're safely on the ground, the flaps will go up, again to get airflow through the radiator, because if you don't do that, you can overheat while you're taxiing it. For those of you that have noticed, if you look on the back of my head, you'll see a buckle. Yes, the goggles should go inside that buckle, and I should have did it up before I got into the aeroplane, but I didn't. You always find out when you look at the camera afterwards.
This sequence is from our Spitfire Airshow programme, produced in the 1990s, chock full of Spitfire action, and that's available to view in its entirety on our on-demand service at watch.planes.tv.com.